Perfect. Thank you all for coming today. I'm going to, well, you know my name, Jorge. I'm going to talk today on behalf of the Human Dignity team. As you may know, we've been having roundtables. This is the 9th roundtable, Juris North, since back in May this year. And the main areas we cover so far have to do with trying to include different perspectives, different views. We've been lucky to have colleagues from India to Brazil, including the US, the UK, Mexico, Italy, and so on. So the kind of brief presentation I'm going to give today about human dignity is not my presentation. I'm simply talking on behalf of many people. Some of them are today with us. Most of them have been working with us for many months, and they are not here with us. In basic terms, many thanks, because I have one of them here, many thanks to all our experts leading the different tables. We've been lucky to have people specialized in gender, like Dr. Kayla Lore and Natalina Stamile from the UK and Italy. Human dignity, our Dr. Wei Feng from China, doing a second PhD in Germany, and myself, representing the UK and Latin America. And for poverty, we had Dina from Kuwait and Clarice from Brazil. Special thanks because we had a presentation last month to Danielle from Brazil as well. Once again, all these people experts in their field, and they were in charge of the different tables. So thank you very much for your work. The idea behind these roundtables, as you may see here, and now we are able to share, was simply to discuss using the pandemic in a positive way, discussing with colleagues from around the world, from different sciences, disciplines, including law, sociology, political science, and many others. The idea was to discuss problems related to these areas: human dignity, poverty, climate change, and gender. And just to take the very first step, to identify common problems, common issues around the world, and to set an agenda. What do we mean by an agenda? Every meeting consisted on dividing the big group into smaller groups, different themes, and setting action points for the next meeting. That would have been our brainstorming session. Once again, today, I'm going to simply bring a summary of the work related to human dignity on behalf of a large team we had the opportunity to have this year. The start, we started from scratch by doing research in international law in our legal systems. Let's suppose I was in charge of Latin America, so I did research on Venezuela, Argentina, Mexico, and some other countries. We had colleagues from Brazil. They did the same with the Brazilian National Constitution. People from India and the US, and again, they did the same with their countries. In principle, we could see that the concept was there even at the level of public international law, and here there are simply two examples: human dignity, the UN Charter, and then the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. What we see is a common thread. Although there is a concept, the content of that concept is not very clear in any of these international rules. We further our research, and again, I'm talking about, we think of about 6-7 months of doing research with this team. And there are already publications. Just months ago, we had this one published by Elgar Publisher, by James May and Erin Delay. And then a bit earlier, we have this handbook of human dignity in Europe, both published again between last year and this year. A very current legal, socio-legal, and in political science research. What we found even in this research, and this quotation explains it all, and although we may have human dignity at the level of the international law, UN Charter, or at the level of some constitutions around the world, our legal systems lack of normative precision. Although they, as it says here, they invoke human dignity, they fail to provide content to that rich concept. And thus, I mean, for the ones who are lawyers, who are solicitors of barristers, we know it can open quite a problem, a challenge in terms of interpretation. The example here, again, one of the many examples we took from our research, this handbook, although it's an interesting tool for students, I would argue LL degree students or maybe master's degree students, I'm not sure about PhD students, because the book is very thorough. It deals with 43 countries, not only the European Union countries, it includes other European countries. And the analysis has to do with the constitutions, so the highest level of in each of these national legal systems, and part of their legislation and case law. The reality, I mean, we have here in very brief terms, you know, the idea behind each chapter. The reality from the introduction, we have a historical account of how this notion or concept was created, it came to life. And then it deals with the historical chronology behind the concept, mainly in Europe, again, because this has to do with European states, European countries. More than that, unfortunately, the book doesn't do. I mean, although again, it's a good tool for understanding how human dignity is being treated within the European Union and some other European countries, the reality, the book doesn't really do much more than that. That is why the challenge for all of us was, first of all, how to define in a normative way human dignity, and how to bring that normative definition to the level of the Constitution. We were lucky to have a presentation from, I'm going to mention just a few presentations of the ones we had targeted, you know, in the sense of human dignity as a target. We had colleagues from both lawyers, Dr. Priti Ramani and Dr. Zubair Khan from India, and they talk about the concept of transformative constitutionalism. Coming from South Africa, they did a presentation. This concept has been accepted by India, and the idea behind bringing change at the level of the constitution in order to provoke the change at the level of general legislation and case law. And then we have Dr. Wei Feng, again, one of the chairs of the human dignity team, together with me. He had his presentation about social persons. Dr. Feng has been doing his research on human dignity now for a number of years, both back in China, where he already had a PhD, and now in Germany, where he's doing a second PhD, in particular related to human dignity. Why social person and why constitutionalism and the change, I'll explain in a second. One thing I wanted to highlight, and I put, you know, most of the names, you know, the people who contributed here, and some of them, they are here today. We've been lucky to have people from, again, China, Italy, I can see here India, Brazil as well, Mexico, and of course the UK, and some other countries, from different genders, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, different legal traditions. So again, I'm talking on behalf of quite a large group of people, so you have the names here. Thank you all for helping us with this, and we are hoping to have a publication by sometime next year. Our sort of conclusions. The reality, as I said before, at the level of international law and national constitutions, we seem to have a concept, a certain term, a certain vocabulary using the expression human dignity. The problem we find that definition of that concept is not clear enough, in the sense it's not prescriptive. we don't really have any requisites in order to know when someone or a country is giving their citizens and foreigners human dignity, is providing the means to support human dignity. So that's why one of the conclusions we arrived at with our research, we need a normative and legal concept. Again, we had specialists from different disciplines, but as lawyers, we do know we need more clarity in the concept. That is why one of the keys is not only human dignity, but the who, the persons, either here the individual, family group, or communities that may be targeted with this definition. That is why Dr. Wei Feng's presentation was so relevant, because we came to the conclusion that rather than defining in terms of individuals, groups, communities, or even states, we started talking about social person. At the level of the individual, social person. At the level of the community, social person. At the level of the states. We are much more complex than simply a man or a woman or belonging to a particular ethnic group or a religion. That is why it's been very interesting to include this concept of a social person within the concept of human dignity. And that is why we propose, rather than one single normative definition, two kinds of definitions. A strong or very narrow, very thin definition, very strict definition of human dignity, and a sort of weak or broader, thick account of human dignity. And I'll explain in a second with the next slide what I mean by that. One of our colleagues from the UK ask a very relevant question as well, how to define what kind of rights may be included and what kind of obligation may be included under the concept of human dignity. Kayla Lore, Dr. Kayla Lore here from Manchester, she was asking, maybe thinking right now about the pandemic and the vulnerabilities. We all came to a conclusion that the pandemic only made visible, more evident things that were there before. In terms of poverty, climate change, and human dignity, or gender issues. So her question was just in tune with our research, because by establishing what kind of vulnerabilities were exposed by COVID, by this pandemic, we could establish a sort of priority in the sense what kind of rights and what kind of obligations should be part or must be part of the concept of human dignity. And as well, we came to another partial conclusion. The kind of normative and legal concept should be global, in the sense of this thinking globally, acting locally. Although we may have a global concept or a global normative concept of human dignity and social person, and whether we may have two sets of the definitions, thick or thin, strong or weak, the idea would be that the execution of those definitions by, let's say, national courts or local entities should come up through each individual community, through each individual state. And I'll explain this in a second. When we talk about the role of the state, we realize as well, being from different countries and representing different jurisdictions, we have democratic states, liberal states, and non-liberal states. So the role of the state should be at least minimum in the sense of enforcing whatever the rights of these definitions. And I'm going again to talk about these rights in a second. In the sense of giving access to people, effective access to people, to claim those rights against somebody else, against their communities, or against their states. That is why it may be through national courts, and we had, again, research. Let's say here we have Brazilian colleagues. I remember now that I see Thomas. We have, in the case of Brazil, at the level of the national constitution, and in general law, we do have procedures in Brazil to enforce these rights I'm going to talk about in a second. The problem is sometimes people do not have access in order to make those rights enforceable. That is why the action plan we established, and it's part of our further research. We are hoping to do that next year in 2021. Yes, a definition that should be normative at the level of the Constitution and at the level of public international law. The United Charter is not enough, or the Declaration of Human Rights is not enough. They are too broad. So we need more clarity and cohesion in the sense of the relation between these newly written rules at the level of international law and the national constitutions. And in the sense of having a broad definition, maybe at the level of the international law, but a narrow definition at the level of national constitution, a more precise definition targeted to each individual state. Rather than talking about individuals or communities, whether we have legal or natural persons, to talk about social person in order to identify different subsets of legal persons. Again, thinking as a lawyer, we talk about persons in the sense of the legal meaning of the term, not persons in the sense of an anthropological meaning or a biological meaning. Social persons in the legal sense. The other thing, again, as I put the example before, Brazil, it may be either through a national court or by the inclusion of specific organs, let's say the ombudsman or the ombudswoman. Our research showed that in some cases, having a third party different from the court may help in making these rights more effective. The problem came when we could see two different rights of interfering with each other. And again, I'll put an example about rights in the next slide. When we talk about, let's say now COVID, our individual freedoms against the state being able to cut down some of our freedoms, let's say freedom of movement. And in that sense, we were planning to use Robert Alexis from Germany, balancing methodology. And again, this will have to do with further research. And to be able as well to distinguish between the private side of our actions and omissions and the public side of our action and omissions. One of the main conclusions in all our tables or thematic tables, poverty, gender, climate change, and human dignity. This is not only about COVID. COVID made evident issues that were there before. This is about pandemics. This is about climate change. This is about terrorism. This is about trafficking of any form, arms trafficking, drug trafficking, people's or person trafficking, HIV, any kind of global issue. So the kind of human dignity concept we are dealing with has to do with any global issue that can have an impact on any of our communities, and the need of having more precision in the legal vocabulary and more action at the level of the state or the communities. As an example, because again, we already started writing about this, as an example, our broad account of, just to put a sample of our work, broad account would be every social person is born free and has the same rights. And a narrow account would include a bit more precision of the kind of rights we talk about. So here we have every social person must have access to enforce their rights and their national legal order, must provide the means to grant the access. So for us, again, and I mentioned here a set of examples, right to life, health, education, water, food, and shelter, self-ownership, and property. To us, again, the narrow account has to do, first of all, with the concept of social person, but secondly, and more importantly, not only for this social person to be able to enforce them, but to have access to the enforcement. Yeah, because we've seen on the news, regardless of the country, children, teenagers, and young adults should have access to education, should have access to water, and so on. The problem, most of the states we conducted our research, they don't, they are not able to offer this access to. When we see on the news COVID, the pandemic, wash your hands. If your community they don't have access to clean water, it's very difficult to be able to offer them access to water, food, and shelter. If we are talking about access to free education for children and young adults up to a certain age, like around the world, up to 18, up to 19, up to 21. The problem is if we don't have Wi-Fi, or if we don't have a single account in order to be able to financially support people who may not have Wi-Fi or may not have access physically to a face-to-face interaction with their teachers or professors, then although we may claim at the level of the national constitution to have human dignity, and its narrow account may include the right to education, if we don't secure the access, that is why our narrow account is so important. If we don't secure the access to these people in these communities, then we fail to provide human dignity to these people. The guarantees, and that's why I put here in bold letter and underline, have to do with national legal orders, counting with a dedicated body, like I said before, ombudsman or ombudswoman, and an independent judiciary. The key, once again, either or, we may have both of them, the judiciary and the ombudswoman, or any of them. But the key principle, regardless of, is the independence of the body, whether the judiciary or any other, and this body to be able to provide access to people, to be able to have the means to provide people with these rights, not simply a sentence establishing a certain right on a blank paper. Let me see. And again, I always finish with this. I have Brazilian colleagues today because this is my personal take on human dignity. Accepting the others as they are. I always tell this story. The Pope here from Argentina, Latin American, he's using this sign. Many people say, I love you. No, this is to me human dignity. This is to me inclusion. And we learned this from our people in Brazil and the founder of the foundation I represent, Xuxa. This doesn't mean I love you. It means I accept you the way you are. To give human dignity to someone, it's simply to recognize them as a human being, as a human entity. We are not giving anything else but the thing they actually deserve, which is simply to treat them fairly as equals, equals against the law. We are all different people. That's why the sign is so important, inclusion. Inclusion does not mean assimilating. Inclusion does not mean that you should behave the way I behave, you should speak my same language, be of my same gender or my same sexual preference or skin color. Inclusion means I accept you the way you are. And the kind of work we've been doing with all the themes, and in particular with human dignity, is trying to bring this as a proposal to monitor later on in our research, probably next year or the year after, because this is a long-term plan, monitor different states and their constitutions, whether they are actually being inclusive with their constitutions, in the sense they respect diversity and the concept they bring in terms of human dignity actually makes these basic rights to food, shelter, education, and so on possible for all our communities around the world, regardless of where we are. And I think that's it. What we've been trying to do with our work is bringing a message of reconciliation. Luckily, we had people from many countries around the world, different disciplines. They were all coming here for free. All our research, all our time has been for free. We're hoping to get funding for the next stage because it would be a larger scale. But again, we could have competed against each other. We decided to cooperate regardless of our technical limitations, financial limitations, or intellectual limitations. We were all working together. I think we've been doing an example. We've been cooperating with each other by having one key thing, mutual standing and equal standing, in the sense we support each other and we treat each other as equals when we have the discussions. What do I mean by that? That although we come from different backgrounds, different disciplines, different tribes, as this quotation says, we all have one main goal: to cooperate, to work together, and to try to offer maybe not the best view, but a view that may bring about cooperation. And I think that's all. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening. And again, this is not only me, although you see my name here and the foundation I represent. I'm simply talking today on behalf of quite a large group of people. So thank you very much, first of all, to all the people who led the different tables. Daniel, climate change from Brazil. All these people are doctors, professionals, and experts. So Daniel from Brazil, we have Clarice from Brazil, and Dina from Kuwait in terms of poverty, Wei and myself for human dignity. And then we had Natalina and Kay, UK and Italy for gender issues. And of course, all our specialists, special presentations, and all the attendees for participating. Thank you very much. And let me stop. There we are.